From the WATE.com Digital Center, answering your legal questions. This is Ask Isaacs. Now, here's Lori Tucker and attorney Greg Isaacs.
With us today, always good to see you, Greg Isaacs.
Lori, it's good to be here.
And of course, our executive producer, Jeff McClain. We're here to talk about jury selection. Why today? Well, goodness, what is in the news?
Yes, there's 7 jurors selected for the criminal trial of former President Donald Trump. The process isn't over.
Yeah, 11 to go.
So, Greg, we wanted to have you talk to us about this is not just this case, but anytime a jury makes a decision, they're holding the fate of a fellow citizen in their hands. What's the process to pick people who can do that fairly?
Especially in somebody in the spotlight like this.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff, that's a question that unfortunately does not have an answer all the time. You know, jury selection is called voir dire or voir dire. It is French for speak openly or speak freely. And it's like a job interview. And what you have is you have the state, the prosecution, trying to find 12 jurors that they think will aid them in getting a conviction. And then the defense is trying to find people that they think are going to be open-minded, presume their client innocent. And you go through this selection process, ask a lot of questions. But really, there's no method to the madness, even though there are, and I've used experts, jury consultants, whatever. You can compile demographics. Are likes harder on likes? Are there age demographics, gender demographics in sexual assault cases? But really, it goes down to your gut and the responses you receive on the questions.
I always thought that was the case. Just kind of go with how you feel about each individual who's up there at the end of the day, after weighing in some of the other things. Let's talk about qualifications for being on a jury. And if you get a summons, and I did not that long ago, after these many years, finally got one. Of course, I wasn't chosen, but because of what I do for a living, obviously. But
don't take that personally.
I know I didn't, and I really did want to serve because I think it is part of your civic duty, you know, and you feel this sense of empowerment that you're in, even though it was General Sessions Court. I was fascinated by the case. But let's talk about the fact that if you're summoned, you have to respond. You can't ignore it.
You do, and under Tennessee law, if you're over 18, a United States citizen, a resident of Tennessee, reside in the county where the trial is going to take place, and you've resided there 12 months, you are eligible to be randomly selected for jury duty. If you have been convicted of a felony, you're disqualified. But other than that, you have to show up and serve. If you don't show up, you can be held in contempt, a $500 fine. But Jeff, you really hit the nail on the head. You know, we talk about our system of justice, the greatest system in the world. Our founding fathers gave us, each of us are presumed innocent until the state proves us guilty of each and every element beyond a reasonable doubt. It is 12 random people that are selected, and they have your client's fate, your fate, in the palm of their hands. So
and
really,
it's so many in this particular case, and we're not focusing on this case, but just touching on it, and the fact that so many people said, "I cannot be impartial."
No, or even if they think they can be impartial, how do you if you're trying to select jurors who come to this case, they can't be coming to this completely fresh. They know who Donald Trump is, or any big celebrity case. I mean, perhaps if it's an actor they're not particularly familiar with, maybe, but there's very few people who haven't heard of someone who was the president of the United States.
Well, you know, often in a high-profile case, we see motions for change of venue, which means because of the pervasive and inflammatory media coverage, you would likely not find a jury panel that was not tainted, that could be fair and impartial. But sometimes the highest of the high-profile cases eclipse that, because, you know, when you have a Johnny Depp, when you have a Donald Trump, you can run, but you can't hide from the publicity. So it really wouldn't matter where you went, you would be subjected to that publicity. But think about this. There are games within games that are happening in jury selection. For example, when you're representing the defendant, you want to hammer home, can you hold the state to that high burden beyond a reasonable doubt and explain the lower burdens for a civil case or to be arrested, reasonable suspicion, probable cause. When you look at my client, do you see Mr. McLean is innocent? And sometimes people go, well, he's here. Why Mr. Isaacs, would he not be guilty of something? So you educate them. Prosecutors, on the other hand, want to say, well, now we don't have to prove this individual guilty beyond any doubt, just by a reasonable doubt. So, don't let the defense set that bar too high. So, there's games within games. But, here's the touchstone. At the end of the day, what the judge will ask, can you be, whether it's the Donald Trump case, the Johnny Depp case, the Murdoch case,
the O.J. Simpson case comes to mind.
Fair and impartial. Mm-hmm. So if somebody says, I've heard about this, I know, I've got an opinion, then we play this game. Well, can you set aside those opinions and be fair and impartial? And quite frankly, when a juror says that, I don't buy it all the time.
What do you look for, though? Do you look for body language? Do you look for, what are some of the things that make you
questions.
kind of...
What do you do for a living? Do you have any affiliations with the NRA, which could be good, could be bad? Do you have, what news stations do you watch? Channel 6, of course. But you want to know as much about that person as you can in determining whether they can be fair and impartial.
Yeah.
What you want to avoid in a high-profile case is a stealth juror. Now, often what we see is people raise their hands, I've got to go to my daughter's graduation, I've got a commitment, I've got child care. People want off the jury. In a high-profile case, it's the opposite.
All the way around.
Mm-hmm.
They want to sneak on the jury and be able to influence history, write that book.
Exactly, get their book deal.
So you got to ask the right questions. And again, sometimes judges will let you ask a lot of questions. Sometimes they control the show and they ask the questions.
The judge was interesting because he said, look, I know most of you have not lived under a rock.
Huh.
You know who this is.
And here's the hard part, Lori and Jeff. So, like for example, in Tennessee, if it's a case where you can be in prison for more than a year, you get 8 preemptory challenges, the defense and the state. Mm-hmm. Typically, the judges will give you 1 or 2 more for alternate jurors because you want to make sure if someone gets sick during deliberations, you can replace them. But you sit there, and as you go through these rounds of questions, then at counsel table in real time, you say, do I strike Miss Holly, who's helping us over here to my left? Do I strike Jeff McLean, or what about Lori Tucker? She seems engaging and whatever, but
she does the news. Does she already know this case?
So then, and the other game, you don't want to use your 10 preemptory challenges.
Yeah.
You want to guard those. So then, can you strike somebody for cause? So if they say, hey, I may not be able to find, this guy, I can't believe he's innocent, or I've heard a lot about it, but I don't agree with it, but I could set it aside. Then you want to drill down and say, well, but you've got some hesitation. You're not completely fair and impartial. And then you have a mini trial at the bench. And you say, I think this juror needs to be stricken for cause. The other side typically doesn't agree. And then the judge calls balls and strikes. So it's a game within a game, a process within a process. So you're playing that grand game of chess. And you want to strike who you want to strike, but then again, if somebody gives a wrong response, you want to do it. So,
Greg, I want, you've been talking about this from the perspective of the attorneys involved. I'd like to talk about it from the perspective of a juror, because assuming one is put onto the jurors, and I'm glad Lori brought up the O.J. Simpson trial. That reminded me of, boy, those jurors were put through the ringer. I mean, they were sequestered for weeks and weeks on end. Obviously, they were put under tremendous scrutiny. They wound up having to go to the crime scene and go through all sorts of rigmarole, and then to make a decision that somebody's not going to like. Whichever decision you make, somebody's not going to like it. So, if you're a juror, how do you survive that?
if you're a juror, there is one word that you never want to hear, and that is you will be sequestered. Because what happens after the jury's impaneled, the judge will say, you are not allowed to use your phones. You can call your family. give those to your bailiff. We're going to take care of you, but you will be staying here at a hotel of our choice for the remainder of this trial.
You'd better have a good book.
Yeah. Well, and also you are not a legal expert. I think that's something that, just like Greg said, these people come from all walks of life.
And that's what you want on a jury.
Yes.
Well,
and yet you have to make some complicated choices. At some point you're going to have to go through a list of charges, and they're going to be complicated potentially, and follow instructions that matter to a person's life.
They are, and here's the other dynamic. You have to ask questions that are going to make, and this is from the juror's perspective, people uncomfortable. If it's a drug overdose case or a drug case, has anyone ever had a drug or alcohol problem, a loved one that had issues, and then people raise their hands and you don't want to put them on the spot? A sexual assault case, think about this, Lori. You're here in a packed courtroom. Has anyone ever been the victim of a sexual assault?
Wow.
And you see people's eyes, and you want to tread professionally and lightly, but you need to know. I had a case recently, and one of the participants did an ethical thing, and I asked that question: has anyone here ever been the victim of sexual assault, whatever? And everybody, no. Are you sure? Everybody said no. And we took a recess, and one of the parties said, well, just wanted you to know. And we went back in and said, hey, does this refresh your recollection? Didn't embarrass her in front of the other panel members, and wouldn't admit it. So you get some very strange responses, but Lori, you've got to ask questions that not only feel, Jeff, makes a prospective juror uncomfortable. It makes you feel uncomfortable having to ask. But
But you have to. You said having to ask, and you have to.
If you were your loved one or your neighbor or someone was on trial for their freedom, their life, you would want that juror. You don't want a juror that's pro-defense, pro-prosecution. You want somebody that can set aside their personal beliefs. Everybody brings bias, prejudice, a belief system into a courtroom, but can you set that aside and be fair and impartial? And I'll tell you this, when a jury is sworn in and you go through this process, it is secular, but it almost is religious in one respect, that people take it serious.
Yeah, they do. Hey, let's talk more about this at 5:30.
Sounds
like
good.
a good idea to me.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you for more at 5:30 tonight here on WATE 6 on your side.